Hello, everyone. We are back with Nick Benson, special effects artist, coordinator, producer extraordinaire, with a long story career of horror movies that you have definitely seen. And our dear friend, we went from what was the name of the say again?
It's Hellbound Horror.
Hellbound
Collectibles.
Horror, who introduced us yesterday. We went by the booth. It's an amazing booth. There's tons of books on memorabilia. Nick's been signing here at ToyCon as well. And we just talked about the first movie that I remember really having an impact on me and looking at it going, wow, that's a crazy, awesome practical effects, but also a little bit of a schlock horror, if you don't mind me saying so, but awesome. It's called Night of the Demons. And this is the first movie that you worked on.
Correct.
How did you get your start in making horror effects, and what kind of led you to it?
Well, my story is a little odd. My whole family was in the entertainment business, and my mom was an executive with Universal for 25 years, and my stepfather was an editor in the business. I fell into music really hard in the late 80s, was in a band, wound up roommates with Steve Johnson, who a lot of people know really well on effects, and he ran the shop that did Night of the Demons, and he just saw what I was doing in my band and loved what I was doing, asked me if I wanted to come make rubber monsters, so of course I jumped at that, and it all started there.
There was actually a funny quote from somebody previously yesterday. We were talking about they were just playing music with people, and then they got invited to be in a movie, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, so it's funny how the different arts connect you to different friends and family there. So what did you do on Night of the Demons? What was the first job you did? And we're like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll do that.
Lots of teeth.
I can see there's lots of teeth.
Made lots of teeth and painted them. I helped cast a lot of the pieces. I wasn't yet trusted to sculpt things quite yet, but
right.
I did do a lot of the paint work and stuff like that. But it was a fun film to work on. There was a lot of really crazy stuff that happened in it. So, it was fun to learn from Steve. I mean, couldn't ask for a better teacher.
The excitement of lower budget films and on the fly filmmaking and to do what you need to do to get it done, kind of thing. But that leads to some much bigger stuff, including Nightmare on Elm Street. And we saw some pictures of Freddy's death in that.
Yes.
How did that come to pass that you worked on Nightmare on Elm Street, and was that?
Well, that's another odd story. I happened to be, I believe I was working on the Blob out in, I want to say Simi Valley, I believe was where the sound stages were, and I had sort of haphazardly tripped onto the set that Mick Strawn had built for the junkyard scene in Nightmare 4, and I was just getting ready to finish the Blob, and he kind of mentioned that I was obviously ready to look for work, and he said, well, why don't you run down and talk to Tony and see if they're looking for people on Nightmare.
Right.
Not Tony, Steve, and so I went back to Steve and asked Steve, and also Mad George, Screaming Mad George. There was a ton of guys working on that film, so I just sort of started talking to those guys, and they both had work for me, so I kind of bounced back and forth a little bit on Nightmare between the cockroach transformation and Freddy's death.
Right.
So,
And then, so Freddy's death, you had the image of the prop that was remaining. What kind of it looked like a very complicated prosthetic, or was it animatronic, or the Freddy's death?
Oh, on Freddy's death. Yeah, that makeup was like a 7-hour preparation to get him into. Between all of the puppets that were coming out of him, and all of the makeup, it was like a 7 to 8 hour prep time for him to sit in the chair and get all this stuff put on him. And he's a very patient guy. Funny story.
Well, he'd been through several years of that by now, right?
Yeah. Only this one he really went through the ringer on that one. He took a lot, but his parents were even on set. I love Robert.
Wow.
Robert's a great guy.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, you get to the point where that's legendary, right? There's got to be a point where the parents are like, well, is this your acting? This is what you do?
Yeah.
And then you get to the fifth movie, and you're like, all right, it's awesome.
I think with him it might have been a little difficult sometimes, because I remember him being sometimes uncomfortable with some of the things Freddy says.
Yeah.
With his parents on set, It's kind of like, oh yeah. So it was, but he was really good guy, and. I don't know if he's still mad at me, but I'm the only guy that's ever stabbed him in the neck.
Nice. Well,
Accidentally,
hopefully
of
he's no
course.
longer. No matter you're obviously apologetic, remorseful for your actions. So they take a look at another one. There's a ton of movies that I grabbed to take a look at. And I honestly can't remember all the titles. There's so many that you worked on. The Abyss was one. So what did you do on The Abyss? I saw it in your credits, and I was just like,
yeah,
wow,
another one I jumped back and forth a lot on between Steve's shop and George's shop, because Steve and George worked together on a lot of stuff. I worked for George quite a bit.
It's really notable though that this was like such a notable movie for its CG elements, and then you're working in practical.
Yeah. That is a perfect example of what I like to talk to people about, where there's a delicate balance of CG and practical that marry very well and make for incredible effects. The stuff Steve did, I know it frustrated the hell out of him to create the stuff he created, but I mean, it still holds up today. The stuff is absolutely gorgeous. We had a phenomenal team in his shop.
What should folks look at if they're revisiting The Abyss? What should they look at in the practical side and see? Like, what would be the spotlighted?
That's hard to say, because it took a lot of R&D to get where they got, and that's part of that. I believe that was a lot of Steve's frustration. We had issues with those aliens turning yellow underwater. And they needed to be clear, so we had all kinds of issues.
The jellyfish
all
guys,
kinds of little issues with just different aspects of testing, and like we'd make a puppet, put it in the water, it turned yellow, and it's like, oh my god.
And those are challenges that you face as a practical artist all the time, right? Because you have to deal with so many chemicals and things that you're dealing with. And something doesn't react right.
Yeah, and you're put in situations where you're not sure. Like this scene has to take place underwater, so we haven't played with these underwater before. So you can talk to the manufacturers, and they'll tell you, yeah, it'll be fine, but
But
you just never know.
If you add that other thing that you added, and that dye, one dye that you chose to use. And,
Steve had a couple, I believe, 500-gallon tanks in the shop that we would actually drop stuff into to test them.
Oh wow!
And it was a long time of R&D to make that movie. It was almost a year, I think, of just R&D before we even started shooting stuff.
Which is the question. We'll bring another movie up, but while we're thinking about that, the other question I had, I guess, would be, from Night of the Demons to something that's much more like how much more rigorous is your process now from back then, or is the process even over time? Like, we're talking about components that could potentially be toxic to actors and everything else. Like,
that's always a factor. That's always a factor.
Was it as important back then, or was it a little bit more casual?
Yeah, I'd say it was. I mean, it's just, materials have changed a lot. A lot's been developed. There's so many more materials that do so much cooler things. They're so much easier to work with now that weren't available, when we were doing that stuff. Sometimes you had to improvise and think, well, this can work for that, and now they make it for it.
Right.
So it was always really challenging, and I think it's less challenging today as far as materials go. But people sculpting, and I mean the levels now. I'm just it's so neat to see how it's evolved, and how many people just really love the practical side of things, and it's really kind of had a resurgence.
A friend of mine got me into watching Face Off on Sci-Fi.
Yep.
It's incredible to see these people. Like, do you find in our art we have seen a lot of cameras and equipment become very cheap and everything else. And a lot of filmmakers coming up, a lot of live people coming up with platforms like Twitch and everything else. In your industry, do you see the same thing? Because I mean, like, the internet changed everything, right? Because we can get all those materials, we can get the resources.
Of course.
Have you seen a lot of people coming in and if so, like, would you give them advice or?
I don't know what advice I can give, because there's so many avenues now that people can take, and I want to encourage all of it, because I think there's so many creative people out there, and I'm really appreciative for just the fans even sort of reigniting my flame in wanting to do more stuff again. So now I produce more, and I do more art direction on that scale, but there's so many young artists out there that just blow me away. They're so much better than what I could even think of being.
Well, they have the great fortune of coming up with all the techniques laid in stone, right? Because you're paving the way for them, and they're codifying it, and it's.
Yeah. But it's so cool to see. It's just so cool to see. Like, I'll give you an example. I walked into a shop, actually with Jim. We walked into a shop about a month ago, and there was a kid sculpting George's Flying Eye from. Oh God, what is it? Which one is it?
Phantasm?
No. Kurt Russell. I can't think.
Oh, the flying eye
yeah,
from
the flying
Big Trouble.
Big Trouble
yeah,
in China.
Big Trouble. Yeah, Big Trouble. That's a Steve Johnson. Another one Steve Johnson did.
It's the winged eye.
But George sculpted that flying eye, and this kid was sculpting a perfect replica scaled at about 1/6 the size, and I just was mesmerized at his skill. I just couldn't believe it looked so perfect.
That's how good a sculptor he was.
I was just like, this is so awesome. It's just so awesome for me to see. I love seeing that. I love when people take the initiative and just, they have a dream and they have a vision and they want to do something like that and they just go after it.
The world needs more art.
Oh,
and that's
God,
the
yeah.
that's the fact. So speaking of, and we're talking about the preservation of art and so on, and we were talking about causes. You are here to tell us a bit more about that. We were talking when we first started our conversation. You were showing me the museum and everything else. What could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So Nick actually turned me on to these guys. It's a non-profit called the HSB PA. So it's basically horror and sci-fi screen-used props, and they. So it's a mobile museum. You have collectors, and they all have, they bought these props, and they want them on display for everyone to see because we all want to see them.
Right.
Besides just in the movies, we want to see them up close. And so we're trying to start working with them, and they have pins and stuff that they make to help their nonprofit and to be able to keep the museum going because it costs money when you're mobile and you're trying to.
Where are they
out.
right now? Where or what's their tour look like?
They're based out of Chicago.
Okay.
So, but you have collectors in different areas of the United States, so they try and collaborate and keep a collection together. And then, they'll do different cons and stuff like that. We were trying to get them out for Days of the Dead in June.
Sure.
So we're still slowly trying to work on that. It's just a little rough trying to get everybody together. And
where on social media can people who are interested in seeing more of the horror, maybe trying to find a way to get them to come their way, where would they find out more about this?
They're on Facebook and Instagram.
What's the Instagram name?
Oh gosh, it's the HSPPA, but I'm not exactly sure of the.
Well, what's really awesome is we also have this thing called Google, which not only helps us with finding techniques, but we could also find the HSBPA, and you could probably pepper it with a couple keywords like horror and props, and you'd find out right away.
Yeah, what's really cool about them is it's a collection of all screen-used stuff, and his whole goal was to take these displays around and share them with people at the cons to just to show them. And people are so interested in seeing these screen-used pieces, and it's amazing. I appeared with them at Mad Monster in Phoenix, and I have to say that after seeing some people's reactions, because James will, like some of his own personal collection, he'll allow people to hold them.
Oh, wow.
And take
that's
pictures
really risky
with them.
too, because
some
of the stuff like foam rubber doesn't last a long time, and it degrades.
As long as he'll explain how to hold it so that nothing happens to it or whatever. But he's very, very giving person, and it's all about the reaction. You see the reaction in these people's faces when they get to hold a screen-used item. They're so affected, and it's really, really cool to see.
Pardon me a second. I'm just going to check right here. I think there's somebody looking to ask a question. And I can certainly answer questions. We've got a few more minutes because we have, who up next, and I'm sure you guys are fans of the character Alan Oppenheimer, who voiced Skeletor, is following you. But we have a moment longer, and I wanted to because you are such an awesome technical artist. You have the skills to pay the bills, as it were, in the field of horror props and makeup.
I appreciate that.
So if anybody in chat wants to ask a question about horror films, his work, or effects, please, by all means. So going back to movies a little bit, we had a couple more. I had Bride of Reanimator was up there, a little bit of an older movie. H.P. Lovecraft, very freaky subject material.
Yeah.
Goes deep into, you can get crazy with the horror. How was that working on that film?
Well, I didn't get too deep into that film. That film, I worked a little bit with George in creature design, and then there was about 3 or 4 effects shops that got involved in the actual making of all of this stuff. I was involved with George early on in just designing them, and I actually moved in the middle of that out of state. So I wasn't heavily involved in it, but just in some of the design aspects.
Awesome. We'll take another one. There was a bunch of movies. I mean, I was actually, like, when I looked it up, I was like, wow. All right, so this is the one that I definitely wanted to cover.
That one always comes up.
All right, this look at that. That is a butt and a face coming out of it.
Yeah.
You can call it butt face. I mean, our face is already taken potentially
Yeah.
But this is before Art's face anyway, so.
Yeah, there's a line in that film that he says as he's coming out of the bed sheets that way, and he says, "I guess you're right, son. I am a butthead."
Oh God. Oh God.
Yeah, yeah.
It's solid writing. Solid
Yeah.
writing. That's a whole package right there.
Yeah.
There is also a picture of kind of like this orgiastic thing going on.
It's
It is.
Yep. That's it.
That is a monument to horror effects. There's a lot going on there.
And I'm right in there.
Are you in the box?
I'm right inside that couch.
So all of this was animated. How are you moving these
There's
pieces
somebody
around?
dumping champagne on my head
Oh, that's-
inside that mouth.
Ew. Were you working with real champagne?
Yes.
It's easier.
It made everything a little looser on set, that's for sure.
Sure. Sure. How many effects artists are in there? Is it just you
There was
operating?
there was a total of 8 underneath everything.
Oh wow.
That set was elevated, plus the couch, the back couch back was elevated, and there was 8 of us underneath it,
Goodness.
including an actor here.
That's pretty amazing to hide that many people
There's
inside.
an actor here. There's an actor here. Yeah.
Get wrecked,
And then
Jabba the
puppeteers
Hutt.
everywhere else.
Jabba the Hutt's nothing compared to this. So I have a question from Land of Oz. Did you go to art school?
No, I did not. I did not. I was
See?
very, very fortunate. Very fortunate. I happened to be in the right places at the right times.
But
There's nothing wrong with art school. I'm totally for it. But I was a kid just out there performing and doing weird stuff, and somebody noticed.
nothing greater than actually
it.
making art to learn how to make art.
That's it.
Right. All right, awesome. Well, again, the world needs more art, needs more artists, and more fun horror. I've never looked at the genre of horror as necessarily scary until I encountered The Howling, and then the one thing I want to kind of close on is probably The Howling. Those are scary werewolves. They're not friendly puppy werewolves. They're not even like they're demon werewolves. How did these guys come to life when you were working on these? What's the kind of the process of building a scary ass werewolf?
This was fun. I was really, although the movie was kind of awkward. I mean, when you see it, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a little awkward. I think it was really edited to where it didn't make sense.
Well, it's a book series, right? And the thing is that the book series is great, and it's a really well-known horror book series. But the first movie wasn't the first book, and then you get into it, and I think that the first movie they kind of put a lot of effort into it to bring into this book series to life, and a lot of fans that are part of it. You can see kind of a little more attention to detail. By the time they got to 4, and Howling really worked, but it was one of those things where the story deviates from the source material enough, where it didn't kind of catch both audiences. So they kind of kept pushing into this pop thing, and then Howling 4 came back and really relived the book.
Right. I think what's interesting is the script itself was decent. Like in a story, if you're reading it like as if you were reading a book, it reads well.
Right.
But the way it was cut, and there's stuff that we talk about in the book about there's a divide between 2 people that were involved in the making of that film, and I think that's sort of where it fell apart.
Right, and then when you have kind of a disconnect in a collaboration, everything kind of has a schism.
It actually had a ripple effect on everything. I really, I talk about that in the book too. It didn't really affect me in the way that it maybe should have. I was just so excited to be working on that stuff in the first place that I was just happy to be making scary werewolves. So for me it was still fun. I didn't let any of the politics affect me. And I was still employed. I was still employed doing something I love. So I didn't,
Yeah, it's hard to be upset when you're like sculpting a werewolf face, and it's awesome. Well, how do people get a hold of you on social media? And the name of the book actually is another thing that I want to.
The name of the book is The Complete History of the Howling. It's by Bryn Kurt James Hammond. He's a UK author. He used to run Gore Zone magazine.
All right.
And he's a great author, and they're getting ready to release the second version of this book. We have some at the booth, some of the first editions, and I'll be signing those. On social media, you can find me on Facebook at Nick J. Benson Official, and on Instagram at Nick Benson 427.
Awesome. And then what is your social media and stuff? Folks
Ours
wanted
is
to.
just Hellbound Horror Collectibles or HHC, and you can. That's the same for Instagram and Twitter. Then you can find us on Facebook just under Hellbound Horror Collectibles.
Awesome. Well, thanks, gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to kind of go over your work with you and a lot of movies that I've seen that have thrilled me. So thanks a lot for
Thanks for
everything.
having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you as well.
Thanks, man.
We're back in a little while with Alan Oppenheimer.